West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
The first reading is taken from Katie Byron's Loving What Is. A thought is harmless unless we believe it. It is not our thoughts, but the attachment to our thoughts that causes suffering. Attachment to a thought means believing that it is true without inquiring. A belief is a thought that we've been attaching to, often for years. Most people think that they are what their thoughts tell them they are. One day, I noticed that I wasn't breathing. I was being breathed. Then I also noticed to my amazement that I wasn't thinking, that I was actually being thought, and that thinking isn't personal. Do you wake up in the morning and say to yourself, I think I won't think today? It is too late. You're already thinking. Thoughts just appear. They come out of nothing and go back to nothing, like clouds moving across the empty sky. They come to pass, not to stay. There is no harm in them until we attach to them as if they were true. No one has ever been able to control his or her thinking, although people may tell the story of how they have. I don't let go of my thoughts. I meet them with understanding, then they let go of me. Thoughts are like the breeze or the leaves on the trees or the raindrops falling. They appear like that, and through inquiry, we can make friends with them. Would you argue with a raindrop? Raindrops aren't personal, and neither are thoughts. Once a painful concept is met with understanding, the next time it appears, you may find it interesting. What used to be a nightmare is now just interesting. The next time it appears, you may find it funny. The time after that, you may not even notice. This is the power of loving what is. The second reading is taken from Marsha Linehan's Building a Life Worth Living. I have done many hard things in my life, but the most devastating was coming to terms with a totally unexpected, complete breakdown. The dissolution of the person I had always been. I had been a happy-go-lucky, confident high school girl, popular among my classmates, often the one to initiate activities, organizing concerts, for example, or simply gathering a group for ice cream at the drugstore. I was always careful to make sure everyone's needs were met, that no one was left out. I was elected and nominated to important class roles in junior and senior year. I was the kind of girl who might be voted most popular or most likely to succeed. But then, as my senior year progressed, this confident girl began to disappear. I did not know what happened to me. No one knew. At the age of 18, I was admitted to a psychiatric institution called the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut. My experience at the Institute was a descent into hell, an out-of-control storm of emotional torture and absolute anguish. There was no escape. God, where are you? I whispered each day, but got no answer. The pain and turmoil are hard to describe. How do you adequately convey what it is like to be in hell? You can't. You can only feel it, experience it, and I did. I felt this inside myself, and I did not want to go on living anymore. But I survived. And toward the end of my time at the Institute, I made a promise to God, a vow, that I would get myself out of hell, and that once I did, I would find a way to get others out of hell too. I was determined to find a therapy that would help suicidal people, people who were deemed beyond saving. I have felt the pain that my clients feel as they wrestle the emotional demons that tear at their souls. I understand what it is like to feel terrible emotional pain, to desperately want to escape by whatever means. Dialectical behavior therapy was and is my best effort to date at keeping my vow. The goal of any behavior therapy is to help individuals change behaviors, in particular behavior patterns that significantly disrupt their life at home and in the workplace, and to replace them with more effective alternatives. DBT, as is known, is different. It's designed to help individuals who are at high risk for suicide, are difficult to treat, have multiple mental and behavioral problems, and often are on the no-admit lists of hospitals. Offered as wisdom for the journey,
May we walk in its light.
Good morning. I'm really pleased to be here to share with you. I'm so happy that Scott invited me. I'm extremely nervous, so please bear with me. Today, from my perspective, I'd like to talk about 4 different things. What borderline personality disorder is, we've heard a little bit about that, and dialectic behavior therapy. Vilma, thank you for reading those. Dialectic behavior therapy literally saved my life, and it's not super well known, so I think it's really valuable to talk about. And then I'd also like to talk about a bit about my own journey and how the different churches that I interacted with over the years played into those things. Right now is your trigger warning. I am going to speak openly about suicide. If you find yourself at any point in distress, if you want to call either of those numbers, I'm going to put the resources back up at the end of the chat, but if you need them in the meantime, please take care of yourself. So my perspective on having borderline, I am not here as a professional. I can only speak to my own experience, to the life that I have lived. And why I think it's important to share is because one of the things that stopped me from getting treatment for many years was some stigmas and false beliefs that even my doctors had about having borderline. It was hard to get diagnosed, let alone to receive treatment. I wish that my parents, they're great, my parents are wonderful, but they just knew nothing about raising a teenager who acted this way, and if they had had some resources, maybe their lives might have been a little bit easier too during that time. But the other reason that I choose to share my story publicly, even when it's difficult, is for other people, maybe who haven't come through recovery, who are suffering in this way. I want you to know that there's hope, and it's worth to keep going. Your life can get better, and you aren't alone. There are other people, maybe that you don't know, but who also are suffering. So borderline personality disorder is a mental health disorder, and it affects a lot of things, mainly your ability to regulate emotions and regulate impulsivity. It affects a whole bunch of different things, and things like childhood and brain chemistry and genetics, all those things can cause it. I can certainly send you more information if you want to learn from that perspective. When I learned that I had borderline, I was right away told the statistic that 10% of people who have borderline die by suicide. And that was really scary to hear because I didn't know what the difference between being in the 90% and being in the 10% was. What I've learned is that I just had to fight to make sure that I was in that 90%. And I just remember it being so scary and so complicated to know that, to be told, you know, having this disorder, it's not your fault. But it's also entirely really your own actions that are going to determine a successful outcome. There's 2 symptoms that I'd like to describe for you today that have profoundly affected my life. There's 9 altogether, if you want to learn about those at a later time. But the first one is chronic and ongoing feelings of emptiness. And this has taken for me a really long time to subside. So when I'm here with you guys at West Hill, I'm really happy. I feel community, I feel love. It's the same thing in my personal relationships with my friends and my family. But when I'm by myself, it's like I'm a child with object permanence problems. You know, somebody walks out the room and I forget emotionally that they exist to me. I just feel so completely alone. And so when I was younger, that was really hard to be on my own. I really struggled with that, and I would always distract myself. If there was going to be silence, I'll put on a TV show. If I'm cleaning, I'll put on a podcast, that kind of stuff. And only really this year have I been able to sort of walk in silence or appreciate my own company. And the second symptom that goes hand in hand with that is described as an unstable sense of self, or a lack of sense of self. And when I say that, usually people say, what are you talking about? You have a big personality, like you come in and you get to know everybody and you don't seem shy, and that's true, I'm not shy. But when I'm on my own, I find it really hard to know who I am, to remember my values and my morals. I know that I have them, but I don't feel them. I don't feel really any sense of being, and I didn't for a long time growing up. And the way that a traditional sort of evangelical church upbringing played into that was quite negative for me, because I don't know if anyone else grew up in the sort of Rick Warren purpose-driven life area, but we were taught, you know, you're only worthy if you are glorifying God. You're only worthy if this. Your purpose is fully this, and not to look inside ourselves, and not to sort of, that we were valuable as individuals. And I found that to be really harmful. I really internalized it. My own story began when I was in grade 6. That's when I started engaging in self-harm. I would fight with my mom, and I didn't know how to handle it. My mom is great. I love my mom. It's not her fault. But I remember when my dad found out that this was how I was coping with stress. And I remember pleading with him, don't take me to the doctor, don't take me to the hospital. I was so ashamed. And they didn't. And I wish that they had. I wish that they had known, and that I had known that this was an issue that needed medical attention ASAP. Again, I don't blame my parents for that. I think they were doing the best that they could, but it was an unknown territory to all of us. I did go later throughout high school. I continued to struggle. I continued to engage in behaviors that didn't serve me and disrupt my life and turn it on end. And what I was told by my doctor's office over and over again once I was asking for help: you have really good grades. You're really socially engaged. You're presenting really calmly. You're speaking with a lot of emotional intelligence about this. I think you're going to be fine. But I wasn't fine, and I was here telling you, this smart person with good grades who is socially engaged, I am not fine. I am fighting for my life every day, and it's getting worse, and I need help. And so this is, you know, I'm not criticizing our healthcare system as far as wait times go. I feel so lucky that we live here, that we get to access free healthcare. What I'm critical of is doctors who dismiss patients out of hand, saying the system is overloaded, here's the resources, but I don't know how to get you to them. Here's someone else you can call. Here's what I can do for you. That's very different than, I think you're going to be fine. I remember circling back to my doctor many years later and saying, what can we learn here? Why couldn't I have received psychiatric help when I was in high school? And the response was, we don't always know if mental health issues are going to get that bad. It's better to wait and see. And I think that's really problematic. I wish that even in retrospect, that doctor maybe said, oh, okay, I see that this got this bad. Maybe we could have referred you, right? One of the stereotypes, especially in movies, of people with borderline is that they're highly manipulative. And my doctor said all the time, there's no way we could have known that you would have had borderline because you weren't manipulative. It's like, well, I wish I had manipulated you and acted crazier. And, I learned that if you go in and you scream and yell and you act in this big crazy way, right? You get help. But if you go in and you have your own words, it's not always enough to justify needing help. And that, as you can presume, over a course of years means the only way someone learns to access help is by these huge gestures. And that's really problematic for me and for everybody around me. The great thing about our bodies is that they don't actually tolerate the same emotion forever. So emotions come to pass. I'm sure we know that. And when we are sort of in distress, like a wave like this, right? You have to get it through the wave, you get through it, and eventually your body will calm back down, your feelings will calm back down, life will calm back down. And what's different about people with borderline is they get to a point where even small emotions feel like huge emotions. So where distress happens up here, and usually we're sort of going up and down here, someone with borderline is doing this. That's what I was doing. And what I want to explain about self-harm, especially when you see it in teenagers, which is extremely prevalent. Often what I was told, and often what other people I know are told, is you're doing this for attention. And it's not really worth investigating whether or not that's true. Because if someone is doing it for attention, if that's what you believe or if that's actually true, that is still a symptom of a mental illness. So it's not even worth going down that path. And we know from my own experience that sometimes that's actually the only way to get that attention. But more often than not, self-harm behaviors are used because we want to avoid going into distress. And when we start to approach distress, if we can do something to interrupt our body and our emotional response, we go back down. So obviously, self-harm is not an adaptive strategy for that, but it is effective. And so when you see especially younger people acting erratically and maybe you think, oh, they're just being a teenager, they're just being a youth, there's a little bit more going on than that. I didn't have the skills at the time to know what behaviors I could use to bring myself out of distress that were healthy, but I learned them through DBT. I wish they taught DBT in schools. I think that DBT is awesome. It teaches you emotion regulation, distress tolerance, interpersonal, being more interpersonally adaptive, and mindfulness. In my early 20s, I was going to the hospital all the time for suicide attempts. I was arrested from time to time. If friends were with me, that would be the only way to get to the hospital. And I was turned away over and over again. I went to every different ER in Hamilton just begging for help. I couldn't get a referral to psychiatry. And it was actually a cop who was so compassionate, and I was just pleading with him, don't take me to the hospital. I was there yesterday. I took myself yesterday. I asked for help. They can't do anything for me. And he stayed. He advocated with the doctors, and that's when I was admitted for about a month of treatment inpatient. And during that time, I got diagnosed with borderline, and I got referred to dialectic behavior therapy, which I did for a year. And that one person who I'm sure he saw a lot of crazy people in his day, he just took the time to really listen that I was not being helped, and he found me that help. I began dialectic behavior therapy, and I just talked about those 4 categories. The one piece that really helped me was radical acceptance. That's in the category of distress tolerance. Again, if you want to ask me later for more information on the rest of them, I would love to send it to you. And that's just, instead of saying, I shouldn't have said this, or this person shouldn't have done this, it's just a matter of saying, I said this, they did this, that's it, end of story. There's no judgments attached to it. That's what Katie Byron's Loving What Is book. She's way on one end of radical acceptance. It's not about approving of what's going on, it's just meeting it with acceptance. So I did all this work in DBT, and I was able to live my life again, but I had no life to come back to. I dropped out of university at that point. I had lost all of my jobs. I had a really hard time finding work because I was so erratic. And it was actually a church that I was tangentially involved with after I rejected church. For me, church was so hard. It was this idea that here's this guy on a cross, you deserve to be punished, and he's taking your place. And I looked at that story and went, that's what I deserve. And I took that to heart. And I realized lots of people who might believe in the Bible or believe in a more traditional Christian system, they don't think that. I realized that there's lots of different interpretations. And I realized more at West Hill, that's not what we're about, which is part of why I'm so grateful to find West Hill. But what this one church, many years after I had left, did is they hired me. They needed someone to cook for their dinners that they were hosting for about 100 people. And they had me put together a team of volunteers of other adults who had disabilities. And we hosted these dinners, and that sense of purpose, having a place to belong, having someone who was relying on me, that was huge in restoring my sense of self. And out of those dinners, I was able to open a company, and we operated for 8 years in Hamilton, providing accessible employment to other adults with mental health concerns. To other adults, our goal was people who were not working currently or not working successfully. I had a life. It was great. I had friends. I had a family. And no matter what, I was still plagued with this idea about suicide. It was a constant battle, sometimes a daily battle. Even though I was happy, my friends would say, you're like the happiest person we know who has this problem. But over time, I began to accept, this is just the way it's going to be. This is just part of my brain. And over time, the more I accepted it, the less often those impulses came up for me. And the surprising end, this is a different story, but last October, I had major reproductive surgery, which was also something I have called endometriosis that I've been struggling with for a long time. And I found this great doctor, and she changed my whole life. And as I started to recover, I think once in the last 6 months can I remember even thinking about suicide. And I don't know if living with chronic pain was a part of that story. I don't know if hormone imbalance was a part of that story. I don't know what happened in surgery that has made my life different now. But it's so different. And my life was already good. I was already recovered. I already thought, okay, my brain's not perfect, but I can live this way. And so what I want to say is that whether or not it's because you do the work and you accept the way you are, or maybe there's a surprise twist waiting around the corner for you, but your life can get a lot better if you're struggling this way. My life has gotten a lot better, and I'm so glad to be alive. My hope in being able to present this talk to you is that it's a bit of an introduction to borderline, which, like I said, has a lot of stigma and is not super well known. And especially, it comes to prevalence, I think, between 16 and 20-ish. So it's especially affecting youth. If you want to stick around after the service and you have personal questions that you'd like to chat about, I'm an open book. I'm a problematic oversharer, so you can just ask me anything, because I would hope that we all have people, I'm sure, or lots of us have people in our lives who are struggling, maybe with suicide, maybe with borderline, maybe with a lot of things, and it's really hard to know how to talk to them. And so I'm a person you can just ask. You can just ask the question, is this going to be offensive? And I can tell you what I think, but I can probably help you find some resources or some groups that could help this person. Additionally, I know how hard when you're in a supportive role it can be. So on behalf of my partner, who, to answer your question, yes, happens to be the most patient person that I know, I would invite you, if you're a caregiver or you're wondering what's it like to live with somebody who has borderline, and you don't maybe want to ask that in front of me. You can talk to him privately, and he has permission to say whatever about what a delight I am to live with. So if you need some resources, if we can just throw up on the screen, and they're going to post into the chat as well. If we can go back a slide, actually. That link, if you go to CMHA, Provincial Mental Health Supports, it has a laundry list of starting points. It's just a list. It's not going to help on its own, but maybe it's a way to start. And if you need help navigating the system, I would be more than happy to do so. If you need help right now, there are the numbers there that you can call. The suicide hotline and COAST is something that you can call if you are in distress, but also if you are working with someone who's in distress. And the number for COAST is 310-6789. You don't need an area code, and they are a 24/7 crisis line that can talk you through things. If you want to email me and you want more personal resources sent to you, let me know. My email is there. It's posted in the chat. If you're interested in learning more, here are the books that I love. Okay, here's the first one is a video by Ben Zander when he did a TED Talk, but Katie Byron's Loving What Is all about a really extreme form of radical acceptance. Marsha Linehan, who invented DBT out of her borderline experience, has written a book called Building a Life Worth Living. And Susan Blonner, How I Stayed Alive When My Brain Was Trying to Kill Myself. That book helped me so much when I was 22. That was a huge lifesaver. So I hope that this has been a little bit helpful. I hope that maybe you can understand somebody else in your life better, and I hope you can keep going because it's worth it. It will get better. It can get better, and that's what I want for you today. Does anyone have questions right now that they'd like to ask? You don't have to. Scott said we should do a Q&A, so I'm doing a Q&A. And now, Mike, you don't have to.
No, please come up. Whoa. That's not the end of the show, folks. So I think it's an excellent opportunity to ask some questions, and what a presentation you gave to us. So can you think of some attempted interventions or comforting words that were truly flat, that made you actually feel worse rather than better? People come with good intention, but sometimes their words hit a target that's not intended. Can you think of some circumstances like that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say to that is that if you're trying, that means a lot. That doesn't go unnoticed, and so I would remove some of the worry. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? I think, for me, a lot of the inaction, in particular with my parents and my family, they were very hush-hush about it. They didn't want to offend me. And you're not going to offend me. Just ask the question. Just say the thing. To speak more specifically to your point, in DBT we learned about validation versus invalidation. And so invalidating things to say that are unhelpful are, you're going to be okay. It's not a big deal. Don't worry. You're doing great, right? That completely rejects my interpretation of reality and what's going on for me. Validating statements, would be, you don't have to understand why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, but you can say, if I felt that way, if I felt like everybody hated me, yeah, I'd probably be acting this way too, or yeah, I'd give up hope too. If I felt. So can you project yourself into someone else's experience? Doesn't matter if you think they should feel that way, but they do. That's the fact. So meeting them with validating statements is what I would say would be particularly helpful. And yeah, I was told a lot, you're going to be fine. It's not a big deal. That kind of stuff I think is unhelpful.
Prescriptive, get over it.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to. I was trying,
Can you think of people that were champions that, you didn't expect to be there to support you, who stepped up and said, let me listen to you, or let me share with you?
Yeah, I mean, so I referenced that church who gave me a shot when I was kind of a mess. My partner, James. my partner with his hand up over there, James, has been a champion who has stood by my side, basically no matter what I've thrown at him. You know, that cop really stands out for me, and I had a lot of bad experiences interacting with police in this area, but someone just stopped and took those extra.
That was a champion for
That
you.
was a champion.
Yep.
He's the one who connected me to those resources at the hospital. So that's sort of the best example I can think of, but also places that gave me an opportunity, like here, like you are today, to share.
James, your hand is up. Is there a question on Zoom or? Can you just paraphrase that, because they might not have caught all
Yeah,
of it?
if you didn't hear that, the question was somebody's niece has been diagnosed with borderline. What was the question related to that, James?
How prevalent is borderline personality disorder in the population?
Hey, Mike, you're a doctor. How prevalent is borderline in the population?
I think part of the answer is a lot of it is undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. So when it actually comes down to making the diagnosis, you probably need a mental health team and a professional to do that. So the family doctor, I think I had 2 borderlines in my practice, and once the diagnosis was there, it's a little easier to manage and help them steer through the system and find a way to cope and survive. So
I do think it's more prevalent than we think, because it's really hard to get a diagnosis, and it does present as many different things. I've read statistics that's like 0.5% to 6% to 12%, so I don't really know how reliable that is. And she mentioned our friend Emily, who I know was also quite comfortable sharing her story, and honestly is a little bit of what motivated me to want to say, because I know as a community, people are still grappling with that and have questions about how borderline was for her. It's the first thing she told me about herself, and we high-fived that we were like borderline sisters. And I didn't know Emily well, but I know that grief is still here. And so there is a person in this community that you can talk to about suicide, about understanding what that's like if you need to. And certainly that, I'm not sure who the individual's niece was, but feel free to reach out to me directly if you want to describe what's going on, and I can answer to my own experience.
any questions? Last call. I thought, Ruth-Anne, I actually had an introduction for you, and I mentioned your name, but it's been a while since I've seen someone so enthusiastic and passionate. You were up here before I could even introduce you. So let's give a hand to Ruth-Anne for... Thank you so much for that message and for your invitation to talk more about it and to connect with you and the other agencies.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.